What's up, guys? So I've been saying I was going to do this video for the longest time, and I finally gotten around to it. So this is going to be showing you guys my force feedback settings for the main three sims I play. So that's going to be ACC, AMS2, and Le Mans Ultimate. So we're going to go ahead and just start with ACC. That's the one I have the most time in. But yeah, we'll start with Sim Pro settings. So first thing you need to do is make sure your angle and hard lock angle are set to 900. What this will do is allow your degree of rotation on the Simagic wheel and the car and ACC match automatically, as long as you have your degree of rotation set to 900 in ACC. So we'll get to that in a minute. As far as the Alpha Mini settings go, I have force feedback up to 100, smoothness to 2. This can be a little bit of personal preference. You may want this a little lower or maybe one higher than I have, but I really wouldn't recommend going any higher than 3 for smoothness. Wheel rotation speed, I prefer 70. I've used as low as 60 before and found it fine, but 70 was kind of the sweet spot for me. Same with feedback detail. 10 seemed to be the sweet spot for me. If I bumped it up to 20, like I've seen some people recommend, it felt a little noisy, a little busy. I just prefer it at 10. And then max torque we have at 10 Newton meters. Mechanical damper I have set at 12. Mechanical friction I have set at 8. And mechanical inertia I have set at 2. And then for the other effects, make sure you just leave these as default. They look like this as default. We don't want to mess with any of those. So now let's get into ACC. So ACC settings. I have gain at 42. This is, a bit of personal preference. You can use this as a starting point, go higher or lower as you see fit. Minimum force set to 0. Damper set to 0. And dynamic damping set to 100%. Now, this controls basically how the wheel gets heavier in higher speed corners for slower speed corners. 100 is the default setting, and I think the best setting. Road effects, I have at 0. I find all they really do is cause resonance that I don't like through the wheel. But again, that's personal preference. I really wouldn't recommend going over 10 or 15, but I prefer them at 0. And then here is where you would set your steer lock to 900. And so that way, as you jump between cars, your degree of rotation is going to match. You're not going to have to change that per car. And then you can see over here, I have different presets saved per wheel. Now, if you do use different rims, depending on the cars you're driving or anything, you can save separate profiles for the controls, but what it'll also include is any of your force feedback settings. So if you have a larger diameter wheel and you run a higher gain on that wheel, you can save a separate profile, and when you switch to it, it'll automatically bump up that gain. And now one other thing that you should do for force feedback, if you can, do it on a keyboard, on your wheel if you can, but you can map a button for increasing and decreasing force feedback gain. And when you do this in a session, this increases or decreases force feedback per car, and it will save it to that car. So for instance, the BMW to me seems to have heavier force feedback than some of the other cars I've used previously. So I turn the force feedback down, I think, to like 0.94 to get it to the weight I want. So that way I'm not having to keep going back and forth with the gain on my preset for the GT Neo. So yeah, that is all my settings for ACC. All right, and now with AMS2, things get a little more complicated. You have the default preset, the default plus preset, and then you can actually use a custom force feedback file in AMS2 with custom parameters and things like that. We're not going to do a custom file today. Those, from the few I've tried, I could never nail down exactly how I wanted it to feel, and there's a lot of settings in the file you can mess with, and I kind of want to give it some time with 1.6, to be out for a while, let people fine-tune their profiles, and then maybe try some. But honestly, the default preset I found pretty strong with some tweaking, so that's the one we're going to use. So this will be pretty simple to set up, but if you do want to do a custom force feedback file, just know that you can, but it's just going to require a lot more tinkering. So with that said, in SimPro Manager, I have force feedback at 100, like always. Smoothness at 2. Wheel rotation speed, I set to 25. I like this a lot lower on AMS2 compared to ACC. And then feedback detail, I have turned all the way up. And now you can see I have damper, friction, inertia, all these turned to 0. There's a reason for that. We're going to use the in-game damper with AMS2. Apparently, it's not just like a blanket static damper. It takes into account some of the things going on in the game more so than, you know, your Wheelbase's damper will. So we're going to leave these at 0. And now if we go into AMS2, go to controls, force feedback. And so you'll want type set to default. There is default plus, like I said, it just exaggerates things. And the main reason I prefer regular default over this is it seems to really amplify the understeer effect, where going into a corner, if you get a little understeer, the steering goes really light. And I just didn't like the way it felt. It felt like it went way too light. So I say at default, you still get that little bit of understeer feeling, but it's much more subdued. So these settings, I have gain set to 45, low force boost set to 5, FX set to 30, damping set to 50. You can play with this a little bit, but it seems like the recommended range is between like 40 and 50. I found 50 felt the best. And then menu spring strength, I don't even know if this works. I just had it set to 2. I think I read that somewhere that that's what someone said to do, so left that there. And now you can see here, reset per vehicle force feedback. So just like ACC, you can set custom force feedback values per car. So we can actually magically teleport into a race real quick. So just like that, we are in a test session. And if you go into edit setup, you can see you can adjust vehicle force feedback gain and percentage. So I like to just have the base default force feedback in the global setting set to 45. I find that's a good starting point for most cars. And then you can fine tune this depending on their car you're driving. And it will save to the car. So that's it's a nice little feature that AMS2 has. So yeah, let's move on to Le Mans Ultimate. So for Le Mans Ultimate, I have force feedback set to 100%. And then you need to make sure you check this for reverse force feedback. You could do this in the game too if you prefer, but I like to just do it through SimPro for whatever reason. Smoothness, I prefer a little higher on the Mall Ultimate. I like it at 4. Wheel rotation speed, I have at 40. Feedback detail at 10. Mechanical damper at 15. Mechanical friction at 10. And then like the other two sims, make sure both your angles are set to 900. So now if we go into my Ultimate itself, the first thing you want to do after you've met your controls and everything, go to calibrate and make sure you check use steering wheel range from vehicle. So that'll adjust the degree of rotation per car like ACC does. And then steering wheel maximum rotation set to 900. And then in the force feedback menu, force feedback effects on, obviously, invert force feedback. So you just want to make sure this is opposite of whatever you have in SimPro. So that way it truly inverts it. Steering torque capability, since we're on an Alpha Mini, that's 10 Newton meters. We have it set to 10. I like force feedback strength at 60. Force feedback smoothing at 0. We're letting SimPro handle all the smoothing. Force feedback minimum torque at 0. Collision strength, I recommended at 60. And I've been using that, and it seems pretty fine. And then steering torque sensitivity, it says do not use values above 100% on direct drive wheels. So I left it at 100. So pretty limited settings inside Le Mans Ultimate itself, but honestly, the force feedback this game has is so detailed and just precise feeling that you really don't feel the need to fine tune it. So, but yeah. Try these settings out in whichever of these sims you play. Let me know how you like them. And, as always, force feedback is subjective. So what works for me may not necessarily work for you. Your preferences may differ a little bit, but I feel like these would be a good starting point to, hop in there and then kind of figure out what you like, what you don't like, and change some settings in SimPro. But yeah, so that's going to do it for today's video. Appreciate you guys watching, and I hope to catch you on the next one. Peace.